This video is going to ask you to do something that is, for many people, the hardest thing they will ever do: to look clearly at your mother and see, with compassion for both of you, what was actually happening. It's not what you were told was happening, not the story that was written before you were old enough to evaluate it, but what the research in psychology, developmental science, and trauma theory consistently identifies as the experience of growing up as the child of a narcissistic mother. I want to say at the start, this is not about blame. It is not about turning good people against their mothers. It is about recognition. The kind of recognition that therapists, researchers, and the millions of adults who have done this work describe as the beginning of genuine healing. Because you cannot address a wound you cannot name. And for many of the people who will watch this video, naming this wound has been the work of their entire adult life. Research from Denver University, New York University, and the clinical psychology literature from multiple institutions documents a specific adult symptom profile, a cluster of beliefs, relationship patterns, and emotional responses that correlates strongly with the experience of being raised by a narcissistic parent. Today, we examine 9 of those signs, and I want you to watch without judgment of your mother or of yourself. Sign 1. You feel responsible for other people's emotions. If someone near you is unhappy, anxious, or upset, you feel it as your problem to solve. Not as something to acknowledge and support, but as an emergency requiring your immediate intervention. This hyper-responsibility to others' emotional states was not an innate trait. It was trained. In the household of a narcissistic mother, the child's job, explicitly or implicitly, was to manage the mother's emotional states, to be cheerful when she needed validation, to disappear when she needed space, to perform when she needed an audience, to soothe when she was threatened. You became an expert in reading her emotional weather and adjusting your behavior accordingly. As an adult, you are still doing this. But now you do it with everyone, because your nervous system was wired to treat the maintenance of others' emotional equilibrium as a survival requirement. Dr. Carol McBride at Denver University, whose research on daughters of narcissistic mothers has been foundational in this field, calls this emotional labor specialization. The child of the narcissistic parent develops an extraordinarily sensitive emotional radar for others, and a corresponding compulsion to use it to manage those others. This is both a skill and a wound. Sign 2. You struggle to identify what you actually want. You are good at knowing what others need. You are significantly less skilled at knowing what you need. When someone asks what you want for dinner, what you want to do on your birthday, what you need from a relationship, you experience a particular blankness. Not because you have no preferences, but because your preferences were so consistently treated as irrelevant or threatening in childhood that you learned, at a pre-verbal level, to stop generating them. Dr. Ilan Golam at NYU, whose work on parental narcissism and its legacy in adult children documents this as preference suppression, a protective adaptation in which the child ceases to notice or articulate their own desires because doing so reliably produces negative consequences. Sign 3. Your achievements feel hollow or are never enough. You work harder than almost everyone around you. You have accomplished things that, by any objective measure, are significant. And yet, the satisfaction doesn't land. The achievement happens and then immediately becomes invisible, displaced by the next standard you haven't yet met. Research by Dr. Linda Martinez-Louis at the University of Chicago identifies this as the internalized critical voice, the mother's relentless standard for performance that her child eventually adopted as their own inner metric. The mother needed her child's achievements to reflect well on her. Nothing was ever praised simply for itself. Everything was evaluated against a moving target of what would make the mother look good enough. The adult child continues to move the target now in their own mind because the voice that moved it is now internal. Sign 4. You apologize constantly and feel guilty for normal behavior. You apologize for taking up space, for having needs, for being upset about things you have every right to be upset about, for existing in a way that inconveniences others. This chronic guilt and preemptive apologizing is the residue of an environment in which your normal developmental needs, for attention, for support, for appropriate prioritization, were consistently framed as burdensome, selfish. or too much. The message you received, encoded before language, was wanting things is wrong. Needing things is an imposition. Your natural, developmentally appropriate needs were a problem to the narcissistic mother because they competed with hers. And you learned to feel guilty for having them. Sign 5. Your sense of self shifts dramatically based on who you are with. You are a different person with your partner than you are with your friends. Different with your boss than with strangers. Different at work than at home. Not in the natural way that everyone adapts their communication style to context, but in a more fundamental way, where your core sense of who you are seems to depend on who is in the room. This is the direct consequence of growing up without a stable internal reference point. The narcissistic mother did not reflect her child's authentic self back to them with consistent warmth and recognition. She reflected back what she needed the child to be. The child, who was never clearly seen for who they actually were, never built a clear internal model of who that was. Identity formation requires mirroring, and the mirror in this household was shaped by the mother's needs, not the child's reality. Sign 6. You have difficulty receiving care. When someone is kind to you, genuinely, freely, without expectation, you feel uncomfortable, suspicious, waiting for the other shoe. Love and care that come without conditions feel unfamiliar and, paradoxically, threatening. Because in the model you were given, love that looked unconditional was not actually unconditional. It had conditions. It had performance requirements. It had withdrawal clauses. You simply hadn't identified them yet. So unconditional care in adulthood triggers the part of you that is still waiting to find the clause, still scanning for the requirement, still unable to fully relax into being cared for, because care was never actually safe to relax into. Sign 7. You have a complicated relationship with anger. You may rarely get angry because anger was dangerous in your home of origin. Either your mother's anger was destructive and unpredictable, making your own anger feel similarly terrifying, or your anger was consistently minimized, pathologized, or punished, making it something you learned to suppress entirely. Or you may get angry in bursts that surprise you, releasing suppressed material that has accumulated past a threshold. Either way, your relationship with anger is not free. It is managed, distorted, shaped by an environment in which anger was not a normal, workable emotion, but a loaded, dangerous, or shameful one. Sign 8. You struggle with trust in relationships. Not because you don't want to trust, not because people have generally been untrustworthy, but because the first person you trusted completely, necessarily before you had any capacity for evaluation, use that trust in ways that didn't serve your well-being. The template for trust was established in conditions that made trust dangerous. Rebuilding trust on top of that template is some of the most demanding psychological work available to an adult human being. Sign 9. You are doing the work. This sign is perhaps the most important. The adult child of a narcissistic mother who is aware of the pattern, who is asking these questions, who is watching a video like this one and recognizing themselves, is already doing the most significant thing that can be done. They have stepped back far enough from the narrative they were given to evaluate it. Research consistently shows that awareness, real, honest, uncomfortable awareness, is the precondition for change. You cannot heal what you cannot see. The fact that you can see it is not evidence of damage, it is evidence of courage, and it is, in every meaningful sense, the beginning of freedom. The 9 signs we've examined today are not a definitive diagnosis. They are a framework, a way of recognizing in your own patterns the fingerprints of a specific relational environment that shaped you before you were able to choose differently. Every one of these signs is workable. Every one of these patterns can shift with awareness, support, and time. The research from Denver University, NYU, and clinical psychology consistently documents that adult children of narcissistic parents who do the healing work in therapy, in community, in the slow and difficult process of building new relational templates, develop levels of self-awareness, empathy, and psychological depth that are genuinely remarkable. The wound that was inflicted can become, over time, a source of understanding rather than merely of pain. You did not choose the environment that shaped you. but you are choosing right now to look at it clearly. That choice matters more than you may realize.